Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. So this is Ariel Mallett. I'll let her do a little mini introduction beyond that.
So, like Emily said, my name is Ariel, and I am the project coordinator for the Digital Islamic Studies curriculum out of the University of Michigan, which utilizes CourseShare to share Islamic Studies content courses across the Big Ten schools. And I'm going to be helping Emily talk about community practice today, using DISC as a model for a couple of things.
So topics 4 and 5, we've kind of blended, so we're not going to stick very strictly to the schedule this morning. You guys will have some hands-on time, and then you're going to have a really like 30 to 45 minutes of hands-on time at the end where you can choose what about our conversation you'd like to kind of apply to your own situation. So, community of practice is initially defined by Liaisons and Wenger, and so they've done a lot of things. Ultimately, there's books about communities of practice. This one's A.T.N. Wenger's. I did a fair amount of that in my dissertation, so I'm seeing some nodding from other people. So essentially, his definition is that communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. And so there's lots of arguments for what can constitute a community of practice, and we have tried to implement community of practice in this. It's like going on its own. Okay, so characteristics of a community of practice: you have a domain, which is essentially a place, right, or a topic of interest. And then you have the community. This is a lot of words, but essentially people are coming together. Just having the title of community, like saying like, hi, I live in the Groesbeck neighborhood, we are a community, does not actually make you a community of practice unless you are actually actively doing something together. And then the practice part of it is that people are actually practicing something. They share resources, they have a shared repertoire, and then it also takes time and sustained interaction. So although we could see this workshop as the beginning of something, we can't actually call this a community of practice because we're not, continually taking it on here. So if we continue to talk over time, this would have been the start of our community of practice, right? Okay, so an example would be a foreign language classroom. So the domain is the foreign language that is studied, and then the semester and the classroom that you're in. The community is the people who exist in that classroom, and they're a community if only for a semester, right? Any teacher can tell you every class has its own personality. You can teach Spanish 101, then Spanish 101, and then that class, 10 minutes later, the next class, totally different because of how the students interact with each other, how you interact with the students, everything like that. So that's part of the practice. And then everybody engages and interacts with each other multiple days a week. So that's a shorter term community of practice, but I would argue that it definitely is one. So there's a difference between what is an intentional community of practice, one that's more of a natural community practice, and stuff that is not considered community practice at all. So Wenger, in his definition, says it can allow for intentionality, but it does not assume intentionality. So for example, an intentional community practice is what we're trying to foster in the LCTL partnership. By bringing people together, by giving them opportunities to continue discussion throughout multiple spaces and long time. A natural community practice would be, let's say, a group of nurses that sit together at lunch, talk about best practices, talk about their patients, talk about strategies to do that. And they don't realize that over time, one of their best learning examples is how to learn from each other. And they rely on each other for this shared repertoire, the shared experiences. And then not a community of practice is what I mentioned before, like a neighborhood, often called a community, but is not a community of practice unless you're actually actively working on something together. So with that in mind, okay, this is, I'm going to go ahead and shut this door, but this is our basic, smallest community of practice within the LCTL partnership. We have our working group, right? So if we say that this is our Swahili working group, this is Deo, this is Mary, and this is Katrina from UW-Madison. And then they are within a broader community of Swahili instructors that share things with each other and do things like that. So this is both communities of practice and then also larger communities that could be accessed, right? That aren't necessarily communities of practice. And then we have the broader world of LCTL instructors, right? Which they can pull resources from, they might be able to bring into their community of practice. Tangential to that, we also have language material developers. They may not be LCTL instructors, it may be a Spanish developer, so they sort of overlap. And then we also have Swahili community members, right? People who speak Swahili that live in the community. So all of these broad circles that could be accessed, like what groups can we engage and what existing communities of practice can we engage in our project? To many extents, that's still what we're trying to figure out. But we're hoping right now and facilitating this working group the most often. So this is some of from our promotional materials or things that we've sent to the dean, what we hope to do with creating communities of practice. So bringing together anyone from native speakers without any pedagogical background and then native speakers with pedagogical expertise. Those could be the people that are involved in our community of practice. So for example, it could be somebody, I've heard actually a few people say that like at their universities, those with no pedagogical experience but a native speaker will be teaching lower levels or something like that. I think, Nicolesh, you said that for Hindi, right, before you got there? That it was just graduate students that really didn't have any pedagogical background but were teaching. So they're native speakers. How can we engage them? How can we provide materials to them that are useful so that they can teach the same experience as somebody that has a pedagogical background? Creating a professional development program that validates everyone, and then also developing the model for creating communities of practice within these diverse groups. How can we engage all of these people together? When we interviewed our Swahili instructors, we asked them what communities of practice have they identified. It was their own group, also larger Swahili instructors that they liaise with and share things with, LCTL instructors both at their institutions and other institutions, and then also the language material developers, being part of that broader network of people who are developing open educational resources online. And then how do they describe the community practice? They understand it as seeking collaboration with people who have similar goals. And then another person said, we have other less commonly taught languages here, so the community practice could be expanded, because there's so much they share in terms of methodology, in terms of creation of materials, so there's a lot to share. And have we been able to create a community of practice? Yes. Is it the pinnacle example of the most productive, wonderful community of practice that could exist? Definitely not, right? There's a lot that could have been done to maybe make that connection stronger, but at the same time, was the pinnacle example of community practice our goal? No. A functional one was, right? So, well, yesterday, you guys created a lot of goals that you have for your teaching, for your LCTL, and for your institution. So I'm going to pull up a document, and you guys are going to reflect on some of those goals that you see. And then think about how could working together, whether that's with instructors at your university or perhaps with people here, how could working together in an intentional community practice help us with some of these topics? And so you'll find at least one other person to talk to about one of the goals from yesterday. You can pick one that was yours or something else that you see, and then talk about how a community of practice could make that goal a reality. So let me get that up.
And while she's doing that, does anyone have any clarifying questions about how exactly defining intentional communities of practice that we want to talk about? Is that clear?
Okay. All right, so unfortunately I can't get them all on one sheet. So goals for teaching, I'll let you guys look at those for a minute. Can you see them, or do I need to hold go ahead and scroll down. So, does everybody have one or two that they think they could chat about? All right, so I would turn to one or two people around you, kind of discuss what you had in mind, thinking how a intentional community of practice would help you maybe pursue some of these goals, make that a reality. So we'll talk maybe just about for 10 minutes and then share out some of the ideas of how you think you could engage a community of practice, somebody sharing practices, repertoires, time, those things, and how that might look. Okay? Awesome.
From course A to course B with different instructors.
Can you hear me? Three times. Alright, we were just talking about how we got people's attentions at like camps and other training sessions. So we were gonna implement one of those. Great. So we would like you guys to tell us a little bit about what you discussed. So maybe one point that came out of your discussions, the goal you were trying to achieve, something like that, just so that we can kind of get a sense of what the different discussions were. So you were having awesome discussions from what I could hear from the circuit. Yes, and the sticky notes are for our next activity, so just, you have those. Enjoy them for now. All right, so anyone want to share? All right, Rami.
So we talked about the collaboration among electoral teachers within our institutions, and Anna here came up with an idea that we could actually start our own electoral. We do have, at Northwestern for example, we do have a group, a Council for Language Instruction, which is open to all instructors of foreign languages on campus. But the mainstream languages, which tend to, and they invite speakers and stuff like that, and most of the speakers tend to be from the mainstream languages, and they don't always address the issues that electals might have.
Right.
And so so the idea was to maybe have a subcommittee or a separate group for just the electoral instructors, and like a support group maybe or something like that, where we could share our, I don't know,
concerns,
or
teaching practices. We have lower enrollments, and many times we teach different types of classes in one quarter.
Preparations.
So we want to know how the other colleagues deal with this situation. They're so different from the other colleagues who teach a large number, and they always have awesome enrollment and don't have these concerns. And they teach that one preparation is enough for their teaching load. It's different from us.
Right. Does anyone have experience with a group like that?
Yeah, so so basically, so we can form sort of, COP, intentional COP,
Yeah.
but the two instructors, issues and challenges are not shared by commonly taught languages.
Exactly.
That's it.
Has anyone participated in a group like that before? Yeah?
I was teaching before Chicago at Georgetown University. I was telling Anna that, and we starting a teaching circle that was very informal. We would gather once a month. It was not just for less commonly taught languages, but in practice, 90% were it was, and then other. And basically, what we we would choose one subject per month of one of the big challenges we would have. It could be enrollment, it could be how to find materials. For some languages that have different alphabets, like how to practice that, and it was very informal. We would have just coffee and it was a group of 15 instructors, and it was we would get good ideas, and also it felt like you were not alone, which was like psychologically very helpful. Like, because I mean, I am the program, very often, like, we are the program, right? Like, it's one person. So I think it's good to just, have these spaces of sharing, and you grab ideas, and also, like, it was almost therapeutic, I would say.
Okay, so you said once a month.
It was once a month,
okay.
yeah.
University of Chicago, is it?
No, that was Georgetown University.
Yeah.
At University of Chicago, she also had an experience trying to get people together.
So I had that great, I was like, oh, that worked so well.
Oh.
So I was like, I moved to, like, when I arrived at the University of Chicago 1 year, I was like, we have to do that for less commonly taught languages.
How did it
So
do?
I wrote, and that's my failure. I wrote everybody, like, it was a group of 25 maybe, or people, all the instructors. I got 3 answers. It was like with the, like what times would work for you. Very open, like, hey guys, like, so would you be interested? Please just let me know what hours were better, like trying to be flexible and trying to do something that 3 answers. So we didn't go. I mean, because it was the 3 that we have coffee from time to time. So I mean, that was this.
The University of Illinois started about 2 years ago, the Center for Language Instruction Coordination. It's something like very innovative there. And we actually had like formal meetings, and I don't know. Yeah,
per semester we meet actually 3 times.
Yeah.
That's how it goes, yeah.
But this semester, we actually have a new coordinator, and she's been doing a lot to try to promote the things, and not only for the language coordinators, but she's been inviting graduate students to attend. And we had really interesting workshops. I participated in a round table for one of them about the job market, like the tips for them that are going to get ready to apply for jobs, that want to eventually become language coordinators. What would be the characteristics they should pursue, how they could address certain deficits that we have. So what's the center called? Center for Language Coordination. Instruction, language coordination.
In the other university, they have been doing a lot in that area. They have what they call Center for Language Excellence, which they provide lots of support and workshops for instructors, and then lots of things. And then the Center for Language and Technology also offer all sorts of support if you want to implement any technology in your classroom. They would have you to come over and teach you how to do it. They have the supervisor, if you're a coordinator. They have another group for coordinators where they offer workshops for your instructors. If you want to give them workshops, you can send them to them. And they also do what they call the chef fair. The chef fair happens every semester where instructors share. For example, if you have a good idea of how to teach something, how to teach a subject, and you can teach, and then they have done, I really have no complaint in that area. They are super.
The name of the group is the Center for Language Instruction Coordinating. They also organize the share fair too. And the other thing that's really interesting is that we're the home for the Le Monde Institute for Brazilian Studies. So for our languages, it's a bonus to have that in our campus. And it happened that this year we had a dialogue in our school. So like the people from Harvard, the big schools that also have Center for Brazilian Studies all came.
Yeah.
And they were sharing different things, because the topic of this year was education. So we had big names in Brazil in the area of education that came. We had a lot of stuff going. And they brought the former mayor of the town that has the best education in Brazil. They brought this person from Brazil to show like how is it that he was able to get his school to be the top one in the country, the public schools the top one in the country. And one of the things that he talked about is they implemented this reward system. So I think sometimes rewards, are responsible for getting this motivation, this extra thing.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was talking to Ann, and she said now, like, oh, what about the workshop? Because I like to attend the workshops they do in Chicago. And she's like, well, I think this time the workshop is just for us, but they're actually rewarding the participants. I'm like, the enrollment now is like,
Oh, yeah.
we are humans. We do like this reward system but for motivation sometimes. So Click, I think, is very aware of that. And yesterday I received an email from them saying that they started a new program to reward teachers. Because usually we see tenure tracks with all kinds of possibilities of rewards and grants and applying for things. But for actually teaching excellence, we didn't have anything. You could do the outstanding and you would never get a recognition. So now they've just created this thing where you can actually apply and get rewarded for teaching.
Yeah, there are lots of these centers can do, like at the Indiana University, they got us, I think it was 2 years ago, they brought 2 OPI trainers and we all had to be trained on OPI for 5 days workshop, 2 classes for about 60 instructors of foreign languages. So they're really doing, no complaints. Not that I want to be like, oh, but they're doing a good job.
Yeah, you guys have been doing that, but not the 4 day, 5 day. They've been offering the two day.
Yeah.
So I was able to take the 2 days free of fine later on the 5 days of the Mallett grant.
We have our Asian languages and cultures program. We offer different languages. So Chinese, Japanese. So we have 5 programs: Chinese, Japanese, Korean, South Asian, and Southeast Asian. So Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, they don't have that issue, or they don't have to Libguides. So Southeast Asian and Asian language and culture, we offer different languages that do not have a lot of involvement. But as a group, we have directors for all those programs. So we meet every month once and then discuss the issues related with our program. So we give updates also to everyone. And then we decided to organize a brown bag lecture type of thing, and as a forum for lecturers to deal with or talk about what they do in the classroom.
Okay.
And then they will have, the question answer session, and then what works well in their classes, and then enrollment issues, how or what difficulties we face, as opposed to Chinese or Japanese. They don't have to spend a lot of time in material production because they have a lot, but we don't. So our workload is more than So we started recognizing those efforts, and we plan to meet more frequently to deal with all those things and then share issues among Southeast Asian and Asian languages Southeast Asian and Asian languages, as well as with the broader Korean, Japanese, and Chinese also.
Yeah, so it sounds like that idea definitely has legs. It's been done in many different ways. You could figure out maybe how to leverage some of the ideas that already exist into something that would work on your campus. So, awesome. What's another goal that somebody was discussing and how an intentional community practice might help that? Renata?
We discussed creating material, but not necessarily, what I would like to have is not just a community of Hebrew teachers, because in many cases many people who teach Hebrew are younger people who have Hebrew as their native language, but are not familiar with the pedagogy and with innovations in pedagogy. They are not active members and other things. So for me, I would like to work, maybe with people here, if there is a way to create this community that will become a community of practice. To see, for example, when I teach tenses, what tenses they teach at the beginning? How long does it take them to move to the next level? How long do they dwell on present tense? Do they have enough language to actually dwell on present tense before they continue to the past tense? At which tense do they touch? At which time do they touch future tense? And another thing, a question of what not to teach. For example, what we heard yesterday about subjunctives. Every language has its thing, and I always ask myself, as someone who really loves grammar, excuse me, well, I'm in a department of classical and Near Eastern studies. The other languages in my department are Biblical Hebrew, Latin, and Ancient Greek. Grammar is an issue. And they use these lenses to look at me too. So I need to navigate to teach it as a modern language, of course, similar to German and other languages, but at the same time, mind grammar as well. So I feel sometimes that I need to consult with other people who are aware of actual standards, who are aware of everything else, but also people that, for example, when I talk to Lena, she also cares much about grammar.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, you know, to talk to her about that and to other people, they don't necessarily have to be from my university, they could be from here, they don't necessarily have to teach a Semitic language like what I teach. No, other languages, but I need to hear what others are doing and what they decided not to teach. Similar to what we heard yesterday about the subjunctive. Or not to teach at the beginning. Not to dwell on that because it's just what 10%? What did you say yesterday? 10% of the language, so maybe, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, Alvia had something very interesting adding on to what she's saying. She's actually dealing with a consortium of 4 schools, right, Alvia? I don't want to misquote you. And she said now she realizes the focus of the different institutions is different. So one school like Indiana might be literature. And then another institution might be maybe the focus is oral proficiency. And so she says she has to bring all these things together, but then there's an institution behind, the institutions behind these language programs. So she's dealing with the university itself, and she's wondering what is it that's out there that would bring these institutions at so that they're all speaking the same language, that they're all expecting pretty much similar things from her, or they've agreed on something that she can work with without stepping on someone's toes, if that makes sense.
Okay. So having, like, dealing with the different institutional expectations?
Exactly. So it's not her, the sister back there was talking more about in the language classroom, grammar versus other stuff. She's saying now she's dealing with different institutions, but they have, I'm sorry I didn't get your example exactly, but I thought, wow, this is crazy. We all want to do CIC, but we don't realize that the differences are not only the end of term ending, but even the content.
Yeah. Yeah, so how do we deal with the grammar? How do we actually teach it? But then what are the institutional influences that affect what's expected of us in the decisions?
And how we operate within those.
Yeah. I think too, if you can identify that and articulate it so that other people can understand it, that will make things a lot easier, right? Being very clear and communicating those things.
Both the goals at your level, but then the goals that are influencing for the agendas per se of the institutional forces.
So we were talking about one of the things that I think is a common concern for many of us, which is enrollment, which is something that I'm really interested in knowing what people are doing to recruit students and to retain students, to have students move into the upper levels of the language. And we are actually trying to form, at least in the Brazilian cluster here, like a, exchange emails and perhaps create something together to know like how you're dealing with all the things from recruitment to, communication with our institutions and departments and all about the things that you need and forming partnerships with other departments and what are the best practices to like attract the students. And have them continue with us.
And that could be something where sharing all of your best practices, but also your institutional expectations. Like, okay, my my class doesn't run if I have less than 6 students, right? Or something like that. And then being able to understand where people are coming from when they're facing pressures. For sure. English.
I think I would like to have everyone's feedback, but my is that for us, the only thing that seems to matter most to our institutions or departments, the first thing and one of the last thing is enrollment. If you don't have the numbers, nothing else seems to count. That is so frustrating. You know, so any new initiatives that we want to come up with, okay, do we have the numbers? So, and again, you don't have the numbers unless you do something, and you're given some, cut some slack that, okay, try it out for a few years and see what happens. We cannot, unless it's something so earth-shaking that you propose, you don't expect numbers to go up right away. So this is, the challenge, I think, struggle. Practically 3 to 4 different universities right now. Right, yeah. So this is, perhaps, all my colleges share the same thing. If you don't have the numbers, end of discussion.
Actual struggle.
Yeah, just one word for enrollment. Are you done, sorry?
No, I think I'm done.
So to increase enrollment, I did a couple of things. First day I lectured them what is the use of learning a language. And second thing I did, I invited some person who got the job because of his language skills. Luckily he was a policeman in my neighborhood and he was going to apply for some defense language institute. So it affects the students. And third thing, I invited non-heritage speakers who learned the language, foreign language learners who learned their heritage language and got some job. So it helped. And I bring some, I told, because I'm OPI interviewer and tester, so I tell them how many people are taking the oral proficiency exam to get the job in business, in medical field, public health, and it helps. So I do like, what do you call it, salesmanship.
I think in the interest of time, because we do,
It's a trend at University of Michigan. All of humanities is facing this enrollment decline. And so there is a similar approach to helping students understand the value of a humanities degree. Languages being a part of it, but really helping them think through and reflect on what kinds of skills they're gaining and how they can talk about critical thinking and being able to give a presentation in another language and thinking about relationships between communication skills. So all of those, helping the students really see how their language class is going to fit in with even the larger major in humanities.
Exactly, yeah. Advocating for humanities is a big thing that needs to happen in general, and then languages within that, for sure.
One of my students, he took Urdu with me, and then he got a job in the Department of State. And he is serving currently in Pakistan for 1 year, and then he will be moving to Mumbai. And I saw his video from the embassy with the ambassador, and they were greeting people using the language. So that was, he shared that with me, and that was a really wonderful thing which I shared with my students. So that really helps, those who accomplish some goals, some job.
Right.
Very short. But humanities is also suffering. I know at Ohio State, there's been this big challenge to even scale down the foreign languages within arts and science and humanities. So the debate is, why are they taking 3 semesters of the language? Why isn't it only 1? Why is it so? People are fearing for their jobs, and we're thinking, oh, I need to worry about Hindi, Portuguese. We really need to work together on this one, because it's also going to affect the people in the high school, because if they're here, oh, we don't have to do a foreign language in college, then what's the use of even pumping money in the high school? So we've got a big job in really having a dialogue with our institutions more than the students. The students will take it. If it's part of a requirement, they'll just have to choose, but if our institutions think this is a waste of time.
And I think that's where you can definitely leverage the community of practice within ACTFL, because they already do a lot of advocacy work for language instruction. you can use their resources and their wording to help and like draft something for all of your language teachers to sign, you know, and give to administration, those kinds of things. Like you can leverage a lot of the resources that are out there for that kind of stuff. But yeah, banding together completely necessary. Wonderful. So thank you guys for sharing all of that. We're going to have Ariel talk about the DISC program as more of a both intentional and grassroots example of community of practice to give you guys a little bit more insight before we have you guys do another little activity. So,
before I do that, I just want to took notes about what you guys just talked about, and I tried to highlight some of the questions that I heard and the concerns from the discussions that you've pulled out. So with creating support groups for LCTL instructors, it seems like buy-in is a major issue there with how to get people enthusiastic and dedicate time to having these conversations, because they're conversations we all know are important, but we're all busy. And we're all, you know, there's so many demands on instructors in particular. So I just want us to keep that in mind, that question of how do we create buy-in to these communities of practice to make them more effective. And then secondly, we talked about material production and resource sharing, but also how to deal with varying levels of experience in developing communities of practice around those resources. And how to do so effectively and sustainably. And that's sort of those questions can be, I guess, transformed into goals, which we'll get to in a second. But then we talked also about dealing with institutional level forces and expectations, especially around enrollment and retention. So that's sort of a third goal of looking at how to work with institutional levels sort of from a top-down approach to approach these questions and these issues, and how to advocate for humanities at that larger level, but then also working with larger communities of practice or larger communities of our peers, I guess, to address those issues. And that will just be useful. That'll be a useful framework in a minute when I sort of describe what we're doing with DISC, because the foreign language faculty in general would be a larger step of a wider community of practice than just LCTL or versus just your working group. And I'll probably come back to that in a minute, but let's start with this. Is this the clicker?
Yeah, sorry.
Maybe I'll just stand here. So we're going to talk a little bit about, or I'm going to use the Digital Islamic Studies curriculum, which is a course share program, or it's a program that utilizes course share to share Islamic studies courses across the Big Ten, much in the same way that you would a LCTL, except that we only do content courses. And it's sort of what Joseph Miller at the CIC would call the Field of Dreams model, where we offer courses and then strive to get student enrollment, because it's based on filling instructional or curriculum gaps across the institutions versus sort of having student interest and then providing a course based on student interest, sort of. So I'm just going to go through a couple of different examples utilizing this, sort of a step-by-step process and how we identify these communities of practice and how we take issues at hand, like those 4 points we just talked about, and turn them into active groups that are communities of practice.
So
yeah.
Could you give us some information, some background about the course, about your course?
Yes.
How many, universities
Yes.
are involved?
Oh, I don't have a mission. Somewhere there's a mission. Oh, there it is. Okay. I'm about to do that. So, DISC is a University of Michigan initiative that strives to define and implement a shared curriculum across the Big Ten through dynamic virtual learning classrooms. Oh my God. I don't know what it's doing. There. Let me just go in and fix this, because I bet it's the settings somewhere. right, format?
Google slides. I don't know if I can
Present.
Yeah, should be a timer on.
Okay, well. I don't know how to fix that. Does anybody know how to fix that? Slide?
What exactly do you want to do?
I just want it to stop advancing on its own. Change string.
That's like
Just you can leave
Yeah,
yeah,
you can just leave it like this. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, let's go like
Yeah,
this.
that's fine. Yeah.
Oops, that did not work.
Click on the present, I guess.
What's that?
Present, there is
No, it's just making me
Oh, I'm not 100% familiar.
There we go.
Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes. Yes, that's fine.
Okay, okay, so we're gonna work through it like this. But so we're funded by the Mellon Foundation and we're housed at the International Institute. And so every semester it varies, and we've been a sort of a growing program where we started just with one course in 2015. And we have progressed to now this semester that's coming to a close, we just had 4 courses, one of which was involved with 4 universities at the same time, and had, I think, an enrollment of 35 students between the 4 universities. And that's the first course of that size that we've had, both in terms of the number of students and also the amount of institutions that have been involved at once. So there's 3 receiving institutions and 1 host institution. And the way that our program is structured is such that we have, I guess I'll go into this. So just, any other questions about that? Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to talk about 4 of the communities of practice that we have within DISC, and then I'll get into how those have been formed and how they are, which ones are intentional versus which ones are sort of grassroots, and we'll define better what a grassroots community of practice is later. So we have, the structure of our program is such that we have the DISC faculty liaisons, which is one community of practice, the instructional faculty, which includes a much larger group than just the host faculty, because we are also able to, our grant enables us to pay for graduate student instructors or TAs as well as adjuncts, so that this distance course has instructional support for the students in order to better sort of recreate or mock the in-classroom experience as closely as possible. The course support staff, which refers to myself as the project coordinator, but also instructional support staff, the technological support staff, financial people, anyone that's doing the administrative legwork behind the program. And then we've also got a student internship program, which I'll get into in a minute. But so just to clarify a little more, I guess, the DISC faculty liaisons are assigned faculty that represent each one of their campuses. So we have 13 faculty liaisons right now, 1 from every single institution. And their sort of role is to liaise between myself as the project coordinator and my director, who's Pauline Jones at the University of Michigan, and their universities, as well as the potential teaching faculty and academic departments and the campus-specific supports on their campus. So that's group 1. Group 2 is our instructional faculty, which I alluded to earlier, are the people that design and implement the courses and deliver course materials. So we have the lead faculty, which is at the host institution, the adjunct faculty, which can be, there's some flexibility there, so they can either be at the receiving or at the host institution, because we're able to provide instructional support to that lead faculty. And I know that this is not the case at all for LCTL instructors, but DISC is trying to sort of form a new model for this approach to distance education that provides a lot more support for both the students and the faculty through these instructional positions. Thirdly, we have the course support staff, which would include technologists, instructional designers, myself as the project coordinator, and the faculty liaisons would sort of fall into this because they do have an administrative role within the grant. But as I said, they're the ones that make the courses happen from behind the scenes. And the course share coordinators would also fall into that category. And then finally, we have student interns, which is a new project that we're doing. And next semester, we're launching this to have interns at all of our active partner campuses. So next semester, we have 4 courses, and there are 8 active partner campuses. And we've only been able to recruit 5 interns, but I'd say that's pretty good for the first semester. And their sort of role is to act as an undergraduate liaison between the program itself, the teaching faculty, student groups, and the students that are enrolled in the actual courses. And that is one of our strategies for approaching these issues of enrollment. Because if we can get enthusiasm and the word out via social media and different student groups, via these interns who are basically our ambassadors on campus physically, we hope that we can get students excited about what distance education is and how they can participate in Islamic studies courses that are not offered at their institutions.
Can I ask a
Yes.
question? What exactly do these students interns do?
So they're basically like communications and social media interns. I supervise them remotely from the University of Michigan. But we have a blog that they write for, they fill up our Facebook page, they meet and network with student groups on their campus to talk about distance education and to talk about the DISC program, basically to like give us a name on that campus. And then we provide sort of, there's a couple of professional networking opportunities that I'm organizing for them, as well as workshopping, sort of like this, but they're focused on undergraduate interns.
So how many?
There are 5 right now. There's one at the
Hosting and then receiving both?
It's either a hosting or receiving campus, anyone that's actively involved in our program at the moment. So there's one here at MSU, Penn State, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, University of Michigan, and University of Maryland, I think. 5, there's 5. And that's something that is very much a work in progress, but fingers crossed it has some impact. It didn't do my thing. This one we have to look at in present mode so I can do like the fun thing. Okay, so I've taken our 4 faculty liaisons, course support staff, host and receiving instructors, and our student interns, and then sort of added on the other smaller and larger communities that intersect with all of those. Because while there's a core group, there's a much larger world that we float in, like Islamic studies academics, the Islamic studies or Islamic community, and then the current students as well. And I'm just going to do this little demonstration of like sort of how these all interact with the working group. So we start with our working group, which is small in the middle here. And you add on the faculty liaisons, and they're sort of the first part of that working group alongside myself that make these courses happen. You add in the course support staff to make the administration behind all of that a go, involve the faculty, instructors and whatnot, which then attaches it to the current students, which are then attached to the student interns. And all of this is more widely attached to the Islamic studies field of academics. So it's sort of encompassing our liaisons and our teaching faculty there. And then finally the Islamic studies community, which is more related to students and faculty on their specific campus. But all of these things intersect with the working group, which might just be 1 or 2 people from all of these parties. But so to look at this diagram, let me just come out of this page because it's hard to know. Each of these circles is a potential community of practice. They may not be actively a community of practice, but there's potential for each of these things to sort of develop into that.
So when it comes to Islamic studies community, is it composed of the community members?
Yeah, so it would be sort of like the Swahili speaking community that Emily referred to earlier, because we also do some academic programming, and we those academic programming events will use the same distance education resources to share them live across campuses, which is a thing that's unique to our program. But we're trying to create a culture around sharing lectures in the same way that we share course resources across campuses to just expand access to Islamic studies content and public lectures and whatnot, which is, again, unique to DISC, but all of these things are sort of ideas and models that can trickle down to LCTL things to sort of bolster up support for LCTL languages and foreign language in general. Okay. So I've gone back to our 4 examples here of the faculty liaisons, the teaching faculty, course support staff, and student interns. And we're going to use these 4 examples to look at what is an intentional versus a grassroots community of practice. So the faculty liaisons were a very intentional community of practice, and I'll get into in a moment exactly what that community of practice looks like, but we needed the faculty liaisons to be identified and for them to work together very actively from the very minute the grant was implemented, because that's the framework from which we built the program. Which, and while I'm talking about this, I'd like you to sort of try to compare these examples to things that exist within your own world of LCTL teaching. So who are the absolutely fundamental parties involved in making LCTL sharing happen? Our teaching faculty, I would define as more of a grassroots community of practice, because while it would be an extremely helpful resource for our faculty to come together as a community of practice, to intentionally join once a semester or twice a semester to discuss sharing resources or what issues arise in the distance education setting. We're working on developing that because we've identified it as a point of potential collaboration. So much like we were talking about earlier with this group, this is a group that we've identified as being a potential for a community of practice and a collaboration space that has not yet been defined as such. So that is what grassroots means, so sort of organic, natural, has potential but has not yet been formalized, versus the intentional that is formalized from the very beginning and grows out of that formality. Is that clear? Okay. And then our course support staff is a little bit of a blend of the two, which complicates things, but basically course support staff is necessary for the implementation of these courses, much like the faculty liaisons are, but in terms of getting people from all of those different institutions in the same room to have discussions about how their roles impact DISC as a program, and also distance education, and therefore LCTLs, has been a challenge, and is something that we're working on, and is something that we've identified as a place we'd like to grow in intentionality. And then our student interns, I would say, is because it was a solution that we identified after 2 years of the grant being in place. I'm calling it a grassroots effort just because it's developing as our community grows, and it's something that we're identifying potential partners that have synergies and that can help move forward a goal. And that maybe makes it a little grayer, but it's kind of gray. Any questions about that? No? Okay. So we're going to go, because in a minute we're going to have an activity where you guys sort of do this for yourselves, thinking about DISC as an example, and applying these efforts to your own teaching practices and shared practices. So I think one of the hardest things is in forming a community of practice, and one of the most fundamental things is identifying your shared goals, or in academic speak, defining the domain that you're working within. And that is where these sort of issues that we've talked about over here come in. Because there are shared problems across all of the LCTL instructors and all of distance education, which is enrollment, navigating institutional challenges, navigating different levels of experience, and incorporating varied views on what exactly the goal should be. And what else did we talk about? How to engage different communities of practice while also still focusing on and getting what you need out of your own community of practice, if that makes sense. So with DISC as an example, the faculty liaisons, their shared goals are to represent their respective campuses and campus missions, which is a big goal, and they're one person. To largely further the access to the field of Islamic studies by supporting the DISC mission, which is what we talked about at the beginning. And then to further the mission of the DISC grant by hosting and receiving a variety of courses. And that requires a lot of, there's a lot more nuance to that in terms of how those goals come to fruition, but the big picture is that that's what they're trying to get done in that community of practice. Teaching faculty are trying to deliver high quality instruction in distance education settings and preparing their students to learn in various environments. The course support staff largely works on delivering high quality instruction, setup and troubleshooting services, and also preparing the faculty to teach effectively in distance learning environments. And if you can kind of picture those intersecting circles that I did at the beginning, you can see how a lot of these goals overlap, which is the intersection that I was getting at. And our student interns strive to engage a diverse range of students at all of our active partner campuses, so hosting or receiving, and also strengthen the networks between faculties and students across campuses. Because one of those sort of extra communities of practice that I'm not focusing on is the current student body, as well as the potential teaching faculty, the field of Islamic studies, and the Muslim and Islamic studies community at large. So these are sort of a connecting point between they're intended to be a connecting point between all of those levels, if that makes sense. And this, I think is, once you sort of identified the group of people it is that you're going to be working with, stating your shared goals really explicitly, and the problems you're trying to tackle is just like step one. And I think sometimes that we get wrapped up in what our problem is, because when it's so obvious to us, that we forget the importance of stating that and sharing that out loud and intentionally saying this is what we're trying to tackle as a group together. And that's really important in problem solving in general. So now I'm going to talk a tiny bit about shared resources. And I'm going to start with just sort of giving examples of the types of resources that we use within these 4 communities of practice. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how those are shared virtually, because that makes things more complicated in terms of the practical application of these things within a community of practice, because that third part is practice. So we've talked about goals, which is sort of kind of your domain, I guess, is the shared goals. This is the goal that you have as an individual that inspires you to strike a community of practice or create one. The community is the identifiable party. And in practice, I'm using resources as an example of how practice comes to life right now. So our faculty liaisons meet either in person or virtually twice a year to discuss how the project is going, and that's probably about the bare minimum that you can have for a community of practice to be effective is twice a year. We have a faculty toolkit full of resources that are relevant specifically to their roles as liaisons that's shared over Google Drive. And then we have an email group that we use for internal communication. The teaching faculty, I am working to build buy-in and get interest and create basically like a virtual conference room that is open to faculty who teach or have taught a discourse to discuss issues they've faced, best practices that they've had, but having that be a standing meeting that they have access to, that they're reminded exists. And there's, I think, a lot more work that needs to go into the buy-in part of that, but that's something I'm working on. There's also, at our annual meeting with the faculty liaisons, we have a formal sort of report out that's either in written form if they're not at the meeting, or they speak in person about what their experience was like. Because the annual meetings just include the faculty liaisons, and often our faculty liaisons are people who teach for us, versus there are sometimes teaching faculty who just teach and are not at that meeting, if that makes sense. They're separate tiers of faculty, not tiers, but groups of faculty. But that gives us an opportunity to either read or hear about what worked for them in the distance classroom that semester. And then the course reports are also, the adjuncts and the GSIs have an opportunity to provide input in those because they have also different campuses. The course support staff, there's a couple of projects we're working on right now, one of which is a course share video project is our loose name for it, where we're trying to define and create a set of resources for preparing faculty to teach in distance learning settings. And we hope that after these are done next semester, that they'll be available to everyone in the CIC. So it'd be a good resource for LCTL instructors. And that is a particularly interesting project because they're intended to be generic, but also contextual, or able to be contextualized. So essentially what we're going to do with DISC is take those videos and build up content on our website that puts them into context. But the videos are made so that they're able to be shared across multiple contexts, if that makes sense. We have tried on multiple occasions, and sometimes failed at having meetings with the various tech personnel that support the courses. There's been efforts across the CIC on multiple occasions for that to happen, and it's not going so well, but it's an effort that we're making. And also the Course Share Coordinator Network, which is mostly virtual, but Joseph Miller did have a meeting at the last LCTL symposium we were at in September, where some of the Course Share coordinators were able to come together in one room and talk about their work. I don't know how to touch and our student interns, because we just expanded into being all of the remote campuses, prior to that we just had one student intern at U of M. I'm developing a framework to create a community of practice for them, where they're not only working together to be ambassadors across the campuses, but where they're actually able to collaborate and learn from one another and share ideas at the undergraduate level. Okay. All of those things, for each of those things, we have to think about all of these things, which is sort of the underlying, the work that goes into making these things happen that sometimes you don't think about when you have in-person community of practice efforts. So I guess it kind of goes from top to bottom, but issues and solutions. So what is the root cause of the problem at hand, which goes back to identifying goals and the domain. Does the project idea effectively affect this for the greater CLP? So how does this idea interact with other communities of practice that sort of expand beyond your own? Like the larger, using the example of the foreign language instructors, which is a larger group of locals. And has there been a project timeline identified? What is I mean, that's sort of just like, have you developed a project charter? Have you identified all the potential talents that are going to help you make this project come to fruition? And how can you leverage the skill sets, and how can you reach out to people that have the skill sets and ask them to join your community of practice? The communication is fairly simple but easy to overlook. How will you communicate? Via email? Are things, do you work collaboratively on Google Drive docs, or are things saved somewhere in a box, or those Dropbox, these virtual things? Or you do video chats, or whatnot. Things live in Google Drive. What are the practicalities of moving through these steps to actually enable you to collaborate and to share ideas regularly? Because so so the storage and access. Where do the resources live? How and who will have access to it? And how long will it live there? And how often will it be updated? So are these stagnant documents that eventually you can save to a PDF and drop into the Dropbox or put on our website or something like that, or are they things that are intended to be sort of living learning documents or video sources or whatever you choose to create that will change over time, and who is in charge of that, and who holds that responsibility as people as there's turnover and whatnot. Because sort of an issue I run into with Google Drive is that I hold ownership of Google Drive. And so if I move on, then I have to like make sure to have passed my ownership to the next person, and it's just like one of those things you forget to do until someone emails you. So thinking about that beforehand, be able to plan in action. And all of these sort of like fundamental frameworks help you to focus your energies on the collaboration aspect and the problem solving aspects. But they're important as sort of an initial effort to get things going.
Okay. So to get back into this, so essentially this was an example of how to look at community of practice in action. So we had the community, right? She identified the 4 different kinds of communities that existed, the domain, and their shared goals. So in the earlier example that I gave, the domain was the foreign language classroom, or German 101 in spring semester at 9:10, right? Is their domain. So it could be like the physical location of the class, or it could be their shared goals. And then the practice or their shared resources was identified. So what we want you guys to do is to take the next 15 minutes to talk to people about some kind of communities of practice that exist within your own life. If it helps you achieve one of the goals we identified earlier, one of the little post-its that we had, perfect. Okay. Right? So if it helps us achieve one of these, perfect. That's what would go here. If not, you're going to be identifying the community, the domain, and then some of the practices that could be shared, that are shared within that community, that exist within your own life. Could be personal, could be professional. For me, I'm involved in a Habitat Young Professionals group, so maybe I might identify that as, okay, the Habitat Young Professionals is the community. We work to advocate for equal housing and to encourage professional development opportunities. And what is our practice? Okay, we do things like advocacy campaigns, partnering with local groups, building dog houses, building bird houses for kids, those kinds of things, right? So, but what would that actually help me accomplish? That might be what I put in the goal. So this is where your post-its come into play. Because this is just wide enough for post-its to be put up here. So you're going to identify a community, a domain, and a practice, and you'll put them in one row on one of these posters over here. And if you can figure out a goal that it connects to, so you probably want to do more of one of these little things, do that. See if we can figure out how we can leverage the communities of practice that already exist in our lives into Hey, Luca. So into our goals that we want to accomplish. Okay, so if you want to talk with a few people around you to kind of like get the juices flowing, that might help. And then you guys can stick up the Post-its when you have your community domain and practice outlined and possibly. Good? Yes. All right. So, what about one thing that somebody discussed that they're excited about?
Hi, Anna. Father.
No.
Which one? She can follow the polls, right?
We have been involved in so many communities. When we stop to think, oh, we do this, we do that, we do that. One thing that we've been doing for 6 years now is the Illinois Portuguese Language Connection. So 3 universities in Illinois, Northwestern, University of Urbana-Champaign, Raquel, and University of Chicago, Anna. We bring our students together in spring for one Saturday, full of activities. So during the whole year we prepare, we think about the theme, and this year will be food, and it will be in your university. Last year was Northwestern University, and it was a Brazilian dance forró, and we were able to, so we collect money, funds from here and there, we pass the hat to different institutions who would like to help. So we were able, and because we are 3, we find more funds. We brought this group in Chicago, and they taught the students how to dance the forró, and we do things like this, and eventually the students also bring stuff and they share what they do. We have some contests. We used to have, I think we're going to have again the support of United Airlines, and they send one of our students to Brazil. We do a competition. And one of the students. So we work a lot on this. It's something we are proud to say that we received a national award last year for this cultural program in Portuguese. So this is something that is very exciting. But
it's a collaboration. We
it's
create
a
community.
very strong collaboration.
Yeah.
And we are in Illinois, so we meet very often in other opportunities too. So we keep having ideas and popping up, emails or text messages about what we can do. And our students, they have to talk Portuguese during the whole Saturday. And they have to interact with other students that they don't know. So we team up them, put them together with the students they don't know. They want to know in Portuguese, to meet other students in Portuguese and do something together. Like last year, they were dancing together with the students from different universities. So we want them to have the opportunity to practice. And also, we have companies who help us, like we had t-shirts for the events. So we have now 5 different t-shirts, this will be the 6th year now. So t-shirts, United Airlines or a company in Urbana-Champaign who also gave support. And we all wear the same t-shirts, and we do things like this. So yeah, it's one of the projects.
And what I like is every year we can ask the students, what do you guys think would be the best topic? Because we rotate the universities. Like she said, next year will be with mine. I asked already last semester, what do you want? And they're like, oh, we want to learn more about traditional foods, because where we are, there are no Brazilian restaurants. We don't have the opportunity half the time of meeting these things that we always talk about. So I'm planning on bringing a chef from Chicago that owns a very good restaurant, so she can teach them how to make different recipes. We'll create a cookbook. They'll have the opportunity to go around signing. Instead of just the t-shirt, I was thinking maybe because it's related to food, we can have an apron with the logo of the program. So we're always thinking of different things to make them engaged.
What is the name of it again?
Illinois Portuguese Language Connection.
IPLC.
And this year, for the first time, we will have a publication called Mural that the university, the students produce it in Spanish every year at the University of Chicago. So two of the editors, they said, oh, we never have any contributions in Portuguese. And I said, why don't we do the whole issue in Portuguese for this spring? And for this one, we need the collaboration from other institutions. Because the point is to have the students of Portuguese to know each other.
Right.
And that's, I think, it's a great tool. You know, to have this publication that will be released at the event as well. It's going to be food memories, the theme.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Is that publication created virtually?
It's virtually and also...
Well, but I mean, do the students collaborate from their respective campuses?
Yes.
And then then the event is an in-person.
The event is in person, yes.
It's an annual
But
event,
the magazine will be online
Right.
and also on paper.
Yeah.
Do you receive any funding?
Well, we have to apply for different fundings, and what I realize is that sometimes our department really has never been able to collaborate with any of this. But we can get funding from other sources, and even companies. If we send a letter, we're organizing this is a national known program, they're willing to do. Like, for example, this company, they produce in Cobrasa, they produce ethanol, and they also do cooking oil that sells at Aldi. The cooking oil, you buy it out. So they've already said next year, for sure, we'll donate the oil that we may use for the food, because it's an advertisement opportunity for them.
We're going to fry everything, right?
Yeah, we'll fry a lot of stuff.
But you said the national excellence, so...
Yeah. But the national excellence from the Association of Teachers of Portuguese, there was a nomination. We were not involved in that, but that's something that only came after the 5th year.
Yes.
It is interesting because, you know, sometimes like some of these things that look great, and they are great, but we have all this load of work and all these things. There's one extra thing on top of it. So when I became director of the program, like the Honors from Chicago, they were kind of like, well, we've done this for so long. This year we kind of like, you know,
Does it come with some?
We were like a little discouraged, but then we got together and the energy.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
We need to do it. We need to continue.
And it was great. It was great.
And it was
a lot of work.
The year where we were recognized.
So you're talking about funding is a perfect segue into the next part. So the beauty of practice identifies, you know, passionate people, what you want to do, but money makes the world go round.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things we thought might be useful is because both of us are working on projects that are grant funded. To tell you a little bit more about how you can find grants, and grants are for the big, you know, big projects. Like you guys might be able to find a grant for that because it's bigger, right? But for something like maybe getting a course release, you know, to develop materials or something like that on a small scale, that's not a grant project. So we're going to tell you a little bit about how to do grants and then maybe where some other places are to look for different funding. So while you are on campus, okay, you guys are going to have, this is, yeah, not working correctly. Okay. So, there we go. So, while you're on campus, you have access to a lot of things which you guys can use in your hands-on time. So we want to show you a few things about that. So you need to identify the project that you want to do, and specifically exactly what in there needs the funding, and have that very clear before you actually go start searching for funds. So exploring funding options, you have the option of going to your college, right, or your university. So the internal opportunities are the best for small initiatives. Zoom a little bit more. All right.
So go negative.
Well, I'll just see if we'll see if it works for a while. All right. For small initiatives, you're likely going to have to find smaller funding or maybe ask local businesses like Raquel was mentioning. Also, if you're reading articles that you find really interesting, and they say, thanks to blah, blah, blah for the funding, right? Look there. See what else they offer. See who they're related to. Why did they get that? Was it a grant? Was it something else? So go find those. And then we also have grant databases, and grant databases are a great place for your students to go as well to look for scholarship opportunities. So you'll see if you guys play around with the grants databases that I showed you today, a lot of the opportunities that are going to pop up are scholarships for students. Some will be applicable to you, but that's a great place for your students to go. All right. So you define your project, identify the goals, write down all of the related keywords that you can think of, and then find synonyms for those keywords, right? So that you guys can do that, and then you go to the grant databases, right? So you have a whole list of things you want to search before you actually go and start searching for the grant databases, because otherwise it will be a very, very frustrating experience. It might be frustrating anyway, full disclosure. It does take time, but that is recommendation. So I met with one of the MSU librarians who handles the grant databases and stuff like that, and that was his big recommendation. So, and the grant librarian, John, said, it's not easy. If it were easy, we'd all be rolling in money. So I'm going to show you a few of these sites. So while you are on MSU's internet, you have access to this, okay? So you guys can use that today. So this page, so library guide, so libguides.lib.msu.edu, has grants and related resources with tons and tons of tabs. Foundation Center is like the Cadillac of all funding databases. And we have access to it here. They pay $24,000 a year to allow MSU IP addresses to access this. It's expensive to get part of it. So if you don't have access, one of the things that you can do is go on this page and look down here, and it'll say find a network partner, and that will take you to this page where you can enter in your zip code, or for example, let's look at Columbus, and then you can find the closest place that has this database, and for that it's at the Columbus Library. So it'll tell you the distance to all the different ones. Sorry, Urbana-Champaign looks like it's pretty far away. I actually looked at that one. So anyway, but this is where you could go access it after today. In Madison, UW-Madison is a member, so there's a lot of opportunity here. If you go in the general, hold on. If you go in the general search interface, maybe. That's what happens when you close the window. All right. What they tried to do is to make it more like a Google search bar where you could just type in anything you want. You could also open advanced search and filter. So you could say population could be age groups. We're looking at adults, right? We're looking at education. You can narrow it down to, you know, if you have something in particular that you're looking at, it's not vocational, you know, you can narrow down those things. And then you can also specify the location of the grant maker or the recipient, because there's some places that only fund like California or only fund, you know, a specific state. So if we do that, we can say maybe humanities.
So let me ask this, do we need to have log into this? We need to have a password?
While you are at MSU, you can get on. Because you're logged into the MSU internet.
So it does it by IP address. So if you were in Columbus, that example she used,
you would have to
went
be
to the Columbus.
You would have to be at that library.
Using one of their
I
computers.
missed the first page then before that.
Sorry, say that again.
Can you, from where? Yeah, that one.
Yeah. So this is, bigger is Libguides, so libguides.lib.msu.edu/grants.
Okay, just before you proceed, this is going to be online, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I will share this with you so that you guys can access that from that link that we have, like directly after this, so you can play with it in like 5 minutes or so. Okay. So you guys can do the searches in there and see what you have. As an example, I pulled up our grant that we got for this project. So you can see our keywords are academics, languages, university education. I don't know why it says South Africa, maybe because of Swahili. But yeah, so that's a little odd. But what you can do is you can search by grant maker as well and see what they fund. So for example, if you look at the Mellon Foundation, if this is what would pop up if I clicked here. They fund a heck of a lot of higher education, right? $506 million in grants given to higher education. Where do they serve it? How big are the grants? So you can see, like, if you think that a grant maker is good for your purposes, okay, well, typically they do the most grants between 100 and 500,000. So maybe that should be your target, right? Or maybe you think, okay, like it looks like they don't do anything less than 5,000, but maybe you think you're more likely to get a grant if you do less, right? So you guys can look at that and see what the recipients are. The most common grant amount is about $50,000 based on average. And you guys can look and see what keywords other grants use. Okay, so back here, the second tab at the top, if you go to this Libguides, researching potential funders, you go to Grant Select, which you can also have access to here, and a quick search. You guys can do things like look at all of these, like for example, let's look at Arabic language and literature. Most of these that will pop up are going to be scholarships that might be available, but you never know if there's going to be a grant that might pop up that funds people postdoctorate. So some of these are research fellowships or Fulbright, but this is also a great thing for you to pass on to your students, is information about this. This has a lot of things like Swahili and as search terms already in there. The other thing you can do while you're here, if you're interested, is sign up for a mailing list, which doesn't appear that you have to have an MSU email address to sign up for the mailing list. So have you heard of the Chronicle of Higher Education?
Yes.
Okay. Its sister publication is the Chronicle of Philanthropy. And you have to click through it this way, which is dumb. But you have to click through Chronicle of Philanthropy, and I can guide you guys through this later if you'd like. Chronicle of Philanthropy, grants, grant station, and then you can sign up for the email thing. And I've already found, like, I'm involved in a lot of nonprofits in the community, and I've already found things from the emails coming in that I've like sent to other nonprofits that I'm involved with that have nothing to do with language education, but are interesting to know. So you guys could then be a connector, a hub for other people with access to this. It's a possibility. So I can guide you through that later, or you can come look at this, and you can sign up for the mailing list. The other thing I wanted to show you is this site. Again, this site is open to you to look at for resources as well for proposal writing. There are ebooks that they recommend. I also checked out several of the books that they recommended if you want to leaf through them or write them down. So to see what parts of writing proposals are important or getting those together. And then your universities should also have training opportunities for you on grants. I would be incredibly surprised if you didn't have a grant librarian on your home campus. So please make use of them. See what databases you have access to on your home campus, what they recommend. For example, for us, we have a full-day seminar available to us, January 4th, about writing grant-winning proposals that you can sign up for. We have on our home campus their key MSU funding pages. We have an office for the Vice President of Research and Graduate Studies. We have grant librarians, and then we also have several different offices that sometimes fulfill a funding role that are all listed here. So my guess is you would also have that as well. The other source I wanted to point out, okay, we're gonna get the food set up in a minute when we get you guys set to go, is professional associations. So your Association of Portuguese Teachers, do they have funding available? Look for that. Look at ACTFL. Look at grants that they might provide, but also network with the people in these organizations to say, where have you found funding for stuff? It might give you more ideas. And then within your college, we have deans of research here at MSU. You may also have a similar structure on your home campuses. Think about multidisciplinary projects. People love to see the collaboration across different departments. If, for example, I met with the MSU Officer for Outreach and Engagement, and she does community engagement projects with students related to their course. So they add on a credit of community engagement with your language projects. Could you engage with the refugee population? Could you engage in some kind of translation services for a school with your class? Like, what are things that you could do to maybe add an additional component there that maybe you could get funding then to do a special project with your students? And then use people here, use colleagues that you know at other institutions, and ask them where they have found funding and what they've found most effective as far as asking certain deans for things, how they propose projects. That will be really important for you as you move forward if you want to maybe fund some of these ideas and goals that you have that you've identified. So this is just to get you started. I'll go back to this main, this main page. If you guys want to come and play with this, that's already set up, that has some of the tabs open, you're welcome to do that. I'm just going to start getting lunch set up, and then I can come around and help you guys with navigating the grant databases or continuing the discussions about the community of practice.
And I just want to make a quick point that part of the reason that I spend so much time talking about how we have these virtual living communities of practice is because funding is hard to find, hard to get. And that shouldn't discourage you from forming communities of practice over virtual networks, because the resources for these sort of distance connections are so widely available now. Just a side note. But